Hello again, Bat fans! This is going to be an interesting episode as we enter my favorite decade in the history of Batman, the 90s. The 1990s is, for many, a terrible time for comics in general, but for me it represents the best that DC Comics had to offer when it comes to Batman. It was a great time for the Bat, and it was mostly because of the excellent creators that were involved in these epic stories. However, it is inevitable to draw comparisons between writers and artists. In this episode, we check out the main Batman comics of the early 90s, and we compare the work of the creative teams involved. First, we'll check out Batman 458. This issue marks a change in the Batman continuity because Harold the Hunchback joins Batman and Sarah Essen returns to the comics for the first time since Batman Year One. Here, Batman finds Harold living in an abandoned building. Batman saves him from an angry mob, and after that, he recalls how he was a genius with technology. Batman then takes Harold to the Batcave to give him a home and allow him to create gadgets and technology for him. In the meantime, Commissioner Gordon is reunited with Sarah Essen, who returns to Gotham after many years. Sarah and Jim realize that, although much time has passed, they are still in love, and this time, they want to make it work, despite their ages. This is a lovely story written by Alan Grant and illustrated by the late great Norm Breyfogle. Their work is pure gold, as usual, and that, combined with the Batman Year One flashbacks, makes for an interesting continuity-driven story. The next issue is Detective Comics 625. It marks the return of Marv Wolfman and Jim Aparo to the Batman comics. 6 months after their last story in the Batman title, they finally make a comeback in Detective Comics, and this time they fix some of their past mistakes. For instance, instead of using classic enemies like the Joker, Marv and Jim created a new villain called Abattoir. He was a mentally insane criminal who ate the corpses of his ancestors as he believed it made him stronger. Abattoir is one of those disgusting villains that nobody ever remembers, except because he is quite important in the Nightfall storyline, but that will come much later. As a writer, Marv Wolfman improved a bit, but there were terrible pacing issues throughout the story. There are times when the story is either too fast or too slow, never quite right. Jim Aparo remained the great Batman artist he ever was, but because of the lousy writing, the art didn't shine. Another important creator in this issue was Michael Golden, who started doing the covers for Detective Comics, and they were absolutely outstanding. The next issue is Batman 459, where we return to the usual Grant and Breyfogle greatness. Here we see that Harold has already started creating technology for Batman, but that is the least important thing about this issue. This story works as a perfect homage to the Batman origin story. You see, Jim Gordon and Sarah go to the movies to watch the classic film The Mark of Zorro, the same movie that Bruce watched the night his parents were killed. Then, a family walks out of the theater, and a thief tries to mug them. Batman jumps in to save them and prevents the tragedy from happening all over again. It's a great homage to the classic origin story, and a nice reminder about Zorro, who was one of Batman's real-life inspirations. However, there is a twist at the end. When Jim and Sarah leave the theater, they decide to resume their relationship. The excitement is too big for Jim, and as soon as he starts smoking, he collapses due to a heart attack, and he lays there in the dark and lonely street. This was the first time that Gordon's smoking habit was addressed in the comics in such a serious manner, and that's just a glimpse of the serious issues that will appear in the comics of the 90s. Overall, it's an excellent story. The only thing I didn't like was that Sarah looked as old as Gordon. She's supposed to be a bit younger than him, but here they both look like old gramps, and that's not good. This story continues in Detective Comics 626, showing how DC started to take continuity more seriously by connecting both Batman titles. Here, Gordon is taken to the hospital, where he recovers slowly. Unfortunately, there is a new criminal called the Electrocutioner, and he is killing everyone who has confronted the gang bosses of Gotham. Gordon is on his list, and Batman has to protect the old man. The Electrocutioner has a special suit, which generates electricity that he then uses against his victims. Batman has to wear a special padded batsuit to confront the criminal, who ends up killing himself. This story was not quite good, and again, it all comes down to the creative team. The story has the same pacing issues where some things happen too fast and there is not enough space for the artist to illustrate the action. It's a bit jarring and certainly frustrating. And although the new Batsuit was a nice touch, the use of the electrocutioner was not. That was the same name of a Bronze Age villain, but this character is not related to that other character at all. And in the end, both villains are truly forgettable. Now, speaking of villains, we move on to Batman issues 460 and 461. Here, Catwoman makes a comeback and she teams up with Vicky Vale and Sarah Essen. Well, not exactly. So you see, the owner of an art gallery gets a precious cat statue to lure Catwoman. The setup is very obvious and Catwoman takes the bait. But Sarah Essen decides to prevent the crime and patrols the gallery constantly. Vicky Vale, smelling a golden opportunity, decides to go to the place as well to take pictures of the notorious Catwoman. The three women find themselves in trouble when they realize that the owner of the art gallery set up a trap for Catwoman and the three of them end up captured. The owner is actually part of a large criminal organization dedicated to white slave trade. He plans to sell the three girls as special slaves for a very high price. Catwoman uses a cat sonar device that attracts hundreds of cats to her location and allows her to escape. Meanwhile, Batman and Joe Potato capture the other members of the white slave trade, and by the time they arrive to the art gallery, the situation is under control. Sarah Essen arrests the criminals, Vicky Vale takes the pictures, and Catwoman gets the statue. The cat sonar device is a clear reference to the bat sonar from Batman Year One, and it's neatly incorporated in this story, where the girls became the protagonists. Another great story by Grant and Breyfogle, and in the first issue they were assisted with the inks of a young artist called Tim Sale. This was Sale's first published Batman work, and some years later, he would become the main artist in Batman The Long Halloween. However, despite how good Tim Sale is on his own, his style is not good to ink Norm Breyfogle, and in the second part of this story, it is clear that Steve Mitchell is the right inker for Norm. The story was quite interesting, despite the dreadful cursive letters, and it got me wondering if they started using Catwoman again, since the second Batman movie was just around the corner. In any case, it's a great Catwoman story. Now, we've compared some of the stories on Batman and Detective Comics from the early 90s. The creators of these stories have clearly different styles, and I dare say that Alan Grant and Norm Breyfogle are far more effective than Marv Wolfman and Jim Aparo. The question is, who is actually better? The answer lies on the next and final issue that we are checking out on this episode. It is Detective Comics 627, the 600th anniversary issue of Batman's first appearance, and to celebrate such occasion, DC decided to retell the very first Batman story ever. The Case of the Chemical Syndicate was the first Batman story in Detective Comics number 27 from 1939. Written by Bill Finger and illustrated by Bob Kane, it started the legacy of the Bat as we know it. In the 1960s, on the 30th anniversary of Batman, DC published a retelling of the classic story in Detective Comics 387. It was a very hippie/surf rock take on the original pulp story, and in my opinion, it doesn't work. Now, in 1991, and 600 issues after the original story, it was time to give it another shot, and in Detective Comics 627, we get not only one, but two retellings of the story. This special anniversary issue features reprints of the original story, the 60s version, and two brand new versions by the teams working on Batman and Detective. Marv Wolfman and Jim Aparo's version take the old murder mystery and transforms it into a sci-fi action-adventure with elements about environmental protection. The villain of the story is turned into a costumed freak called Pesticide, who seeks revenge using chemical weapons. Although the main plot of the story remains almost the same, the concept is drastically different, so that the original story is almost impossible to recognize. And then there is the version by Alan Grant and Norm Breyfogle. They take the original pulp story and simply modernize it for the 90s. Their version is so faithful to the original and it improves the writing and art so dramatically that it makes you feel extremely satisfied with the result. It's like if you were reading the original detective story, but with spectacular new art, great pulp atmosphere and modern dialogue. Plus, Every single page is filled with references to the dozens of creators who have shaped the history and legacy of Batman, a proper homage to Bill Finger and Bob Kane. In other words, Alan Grant and Norm Breyfogle proved to be the best Batman creative team of the early 90s. And that's not to say that Wolfman and Aparo were bad, it's simply that Grant and Breyfogle are phenomenal. Just take a look at the extraordinary pin-up poster that they used to end their story in this issue. I was speechless the first time I saw it. Alan Grant and Norm Breyfogle defined Batman for an entire generation, and that was just at the beginning of the 90s. We still have the whole decade to go through, and there are many more creators that will define my favorite decade in the Batman comics. The next creator we are checking out is the legendary Dennis O'Neil, and his iconic storyline called Venom. If you don't want to miss that, subscribe now and come back for the next episode. Until then, Godspeed, my friends!